Hey, I'm Kamara Rose, and this is Everyday Changemakers. Conversations with social change practitioners about the journey of personal transformation and social transformation.
I can forfeit freedom and go back into the bondage that is oppressive, but it's also convenient. It's that tug of war constantly of my bondage is so convenient, and freedom sometimes is too much of a responsibility, and yet pushing people to move beyond. There's something more to it.
Today, I'm talking with Reverend Rashad Moore at the historic Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, New York, which was founded in 1808 when a group of African-American congregants walked out of the First Baptist Church of New York because they refused to accept segregated seating. Abyssinian's legacy of freedom and justice struck a chord with Rashad. He grew up in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, where he was steeped in the tradition, music, preaching, and ministry of the Baptist Church.
The first example of a minister was my grandmother, both of my grandmothers, Eloise Scott and Frances Moore, but particularly my maternal grandmother, who I spent my afternoons after school with. My grandmother was the kind of person who lived in the projects in Bed-Stuy, but even as a child, my grandmother was this moral exemplar for other neighbors. There were times when I remember my grandmother would sit down with teenage mothers in her building to give them advice. My grandmother was the church member who'd made sick visits, and I was a child who was often left in the waiting room while she went upstairs. And so in my mind, as a young child, I was seeing my grandmother just living out what it meant to be a disciple of Christ.
Rashad pretty much always knew he was going to be a preacher.
I know the story in my family goes that when I was a child, very young, before I could actually talk, that I would walk around my grandparents' living room preaching, just screaming to the top of my lungs with a dictionary in my hand.
And more than anything, Rashad wanted to be a Morehouse preacher, to be connected to the legacy and tradition of scholars like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Reverend Dr. Sandy F. Ray, the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss, and the Reverend Dr. Calvin Butts.
But in my senior year of high school, I was rejected from Morehouse, and that was one of the worst times of my life. I had only applied to Morehouse. That was the only school I applied to, and when I was rejected, my guidance counselor told the rest of the school, Rashad was rejected from his only choice. This is why I'm telling you all not to put all your eggs in one basket. And I fought to go to Morehouse. And I understood that my calling to ministry would be deeply tied to that tradition. I was accepted to Morehouse on a chance. I was accepted to Morehouse on an opportunity. And that alone has really shaped my understanding of ministry, that the people that I encounter on an everyday basis are people who have in some sense been challenged, rejected, pressed against the wall, fighting back, and each and every one of them deserves a new chance, a new opportunity. And for me, that is the gospel. The gospel is that there is another opportunity, there's another chance, there's an opportunity to turn the page for each and every person that we encounter.
After graduating from Morehouse and Union Theological Seminary, Rashad now approaches his ministry at Abyssinian with a thoughtfulness and a devotion to people, much like his grandmother before him.
Emilie Towns talks about the fact that the most impactful moments are not just like these loud moments of like demanding truth or speaking truth to power or knocking down the walls of City Hall. She doesn't say that, I say that. But she talks about this idea that the everydayness is embracing every little moment of the day with intention. When I go to make a sick visit, when I'm sitting with someone who is ill or sitting with a family in crisis, I want to evoke that spirit of my grandmother. A part of ministry is that after a couple of years, it becomes mundane and it becomes a series of things to do, to the point that you can easily do this thing mindlessly. It's just that I'm just doing this. I'm here, I'm doing this, I'm preaching, I'm teaching, and you're not really cognizant of who's right in front of you and the impact that your words may have on other people or just your presence alone. Those everyday moments are moments when I am now living with the spirit of my grandmother. You know, as a Christian, I do believe that our ancestors don't die, that their spirit is still with us, and I can feel it. I can feel it. I can feel it with no doubt.
We talked about the everydayness of beloved community, about letting go of what's familiar in order to grow, and about cultivating Black joy in the face of despair.
I often say that I see moments of the beloved community not so much on Sunday morning. It's in the moments that go unrecorded, unmentioned. It's when a member emails you because they have a son who's in trouble with the system, and you also have a member in your church who's on the force, and that member can help you navigate that very system. And that's not a light example for me, because that happens all the time. I think about the text with a recent sermon I preached about Paul and Silas being in prison, and they stay in prison after the earthquake, and the correction officer who's guarding the jail stays and is converted because they stayed for him. Because had they left, he would be killed. And it's a subtle movement in that text where you see that you have the jailer here, you have prisoners down here, but when the jail is converted, they now become brothers and sisters. So it's, even though you have this system and you have this hierarchy of prisoners, correction officers, but we come together in this one beloved community, and now the prisoners and the jailer now become brothers and sisters. And I see it happening all the time where someone's in trouble and the answer to your problem is in the congregation. I've seen it where there was a young sister in our church who was in trouble and she needed bail, and a member anonymously gave the money so that she could be supported. I see it when people come to us and they're low or behind on rent and they need the church to pick up. That's, for me, the beloved community. It's where one person's need is met by the other. It's not so much about something that we're waiting to happen. I think oftentimes we're like, everything has to be in order, everything has to be on the same page for this beloved community, this kingdom to come on earth as it is in heaven, where it's not a moment that's about to come, but it's moments that happen day in and day out, and yet we have to be just in tune enough to see that they're happening. Working at a church, I realized that there is no perfect church. There is no church where everyone gets along. There's not a church where everything is right? Because the heat might not be on one Sunday, and then next Sunday when it is on, everyone is complaining. It's, but it's in those everyday moments that you have to be just sensitive enough to the movement of God to realize this was a moment of beloved community. This was a moment of the kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven.
I was thinking a lot when you were talking about, it's almost like the dissolution between those boundaries, or the idea of separateness, right? Where you're saying, I have this identity and you have that identity, but now we find that we have a shared identity, or I'm not alone with whatever this is. I'm actually part of many. So that's a powerful example.
It's beautiful.
Hey everyone, I'm taking a quick break here to let you know about our guest next week, Alicia Fernandez Simpson, the founder and executive director of the Crossover Yoga Project.
We have a lot of work to do as changemakers. The only big thing that I would really, really hope for is, with all the work that we're doing and all the blood, sweat, and tears that we put into it, is that we remember to take care of ourselves, because we can't make that change unless we're taking care of ourselves.
Listen next week to hear how Alicia brings the self-care practices of breath work, meditation, yoga, and expressive arts to support young women who are impacted by the foster care and juvenile justice systems in New York. And now, back to the conversation with Rashad. Just to give you a heads up, we're going to reference the Bible scripture Matthew chapter 4, verses 18 through 22, where Jesus calls fishermen from the Sea of Galilee to drop their nets and follow him.
I also like that you keep coming back to this, what to me it sounds like mindfulness, but this focus on the everyday, the more minute or the small, and witnessing God in those moments. It makes me think about another part of your ministry. When I was listening to you preach, you talked about the gospel is about learning to love other people. And coming back to your story of Matthew, it was if you leave your old ideas and you leave your old theology and you leave your old habits, that it can open you up to be in relationship with somebody in a new way, and that is what ministry is. Ministry is about learning to love people.
Oh, yeah. A part of growth requires that you are willing to change something. And a part of growth and why it's so terrifying is that you're going to lose something. Ralph Waldo Emerson says that you know that you're growing when you can look back and see how the chorus of your friends have changed. And with growth, like you're being called to let something go. You have to change. I mean, I read this the other day in DuBois and the Souls of Black Folk, that a part of this sense of democracy is that maybe I grew up in a community that taught me that I am better than Black people, right? That there is a sense of supremacy. And as you grow, if you want to grow towards this beloved community or towards this democracy, that you might realize that what you learned was actually wrong. Have to let that go in order for us to grow together. Even in Black communities, even in religious communities, you may have been raised in a way that you believe that same-gender love is a sin. And the question is, are you going to grow? Or are you willing to grow enough to let go of something that no longer gives life? And that text, they said that in Matthew, that they dropped their nets, that they divorced themselves from everything that they knew. They're fishermen. All they know are nets. That's it. Nets, fish, whatever else they got, boats. They dropped everything that they knew in order to embrace something that was life-giving, that was also strange, that was also brand new for them. I mean, these are illiterate, poor fishermen. That's all they know. And you can't follow Jesus or become a disciple or commit to this new way of life while still trying to hold on to the old things that are familiar. And that's challenging. I mean, that's the challenge with recidivism, right? That's the challenge of, here I am coming out of prison. And when I was in prison, I was enchained, right? I was locked up, but I had 3 hots. I had a cot. And I knew exactly where I was going to sleep at night. And then to come home, and because of laws, I can't stay with Auntie Brenda in the projects. I can't get a job. I can't apply for a student loan. And it's crazy, right? I can forfeit freedom and go back into the bondage that is oppressive, but it's also convenient. It's that tug of war. I mean, this was the same thing in Exodus. Moses is trying to get them to the land, quote unquote, that was promised to them. And each time they get closer and closer, they're like, listen, back there, we were oppressed under Pharaoh's rule, but it was better. We had food, we had water, we weren't thirsty. And it's that mental thing constantly of my bondage is so convenient, and freedom sometimes is too much of a responsibility, and yet pushing people to move beyond. That there's something more to it. And they need that. They need that.
Hey everyone, I'm pausing the conversation here because I want to give you a resource that you can use to identify and let go of those familiar, convenient patterns and routines that, like Rashad said, are actually keeping you in bondage and keeping you from growing. Based on the scripture of Matthew, the resource is called Drop Your Nets, and you can download it for free at kamararose.com/resources. The link is also right in the show notes, so go ahead and click it. Use the guide to show you where you might be stuck in a net of denial or convenience and how you can get out of it. Plus, this exercise is fun because you get to draw pictures. So go to kamararose.com/resources to download the Drop Your Nets guide. One more thing. Throughout this conversation, Rashad talks about different authors, scriptures, and musicians, and I know it comes pretty rapidly. If you're curious, I also compiled a list of the references, and you can find that in the show notes too. Okay, now back to the conversation.
What is it that supports your own growth for you as a minister now on a daily basis? If you're thinking, okay, what am I leaving behind? Where are the spaces that I need to grow? And how do you practice that?
People. That's my area of growth. That's every now and again when I think that I've mastered this thing, I find that I haven't. I mean, a few weeks ago, I had a member who wanted me to do something that I really could not do. My time would not allow me to do it. And she was upset, so upset to the point that she went back and kind of like badmouthed me. And in my natural sense, it was like, oh, I'm from Brooklyn, forget you. Like, in that sense of I can turn away from you at this moment and never look back and not give a care about you. I think after a while being in ministry day in and day out, year after year, you start to see the gospels in new ways. Like, it's like Jesus died or stuck with his friend who like betrayed him. Like, it's that moment.
And on that, I'm always really interested because I'm thinking a lot of practitioners in the field and that these are areas of growth that everybody is working on. I know for myself, right? Opening the heart more, staying connected to people. For you, when you're saying, okay, I'm not going to turn away, I'm not going to say, oh, forget you, I have to actually come back. What is it that's supporting you? Is it prayer? What's the practice or the belief? Or
for me, honestly, the moments when I really feel like I need to hear from God, it is in music. Like, music is so important to me. It's some of my favorite artists, Gregory Porter. Gregory Porter has a brother, Lloyd Porter, who has a coffee shop in Brooklyn. And so we often talk about, like, I can get the background sometimes on some of the songs. And one of my favorite songs that I've been listening to a lot lately is Take Me to the Alley, Take Me to the Afflicted One. And they tell the story about their mom. Their mom was a missionary who would just take people in and always provided a place at the table for them. And you hear it in Gregory Porter's music, and then you see it in his brother's coffee shop, this sense of just being open and loving to all that you meet. If I really need to hear from God, just sit me in a room with a friend or sit me in a room with just some good music.
Take me to the alley. Take me to the afflicted ones. Take me to the lonely ones that somehow lost their way. Let them hear me say, I am your friend. Come to my table. Rest here in my garden. You will have a pardon.
and you used to play the organ or the piano. You still do?
I don't play. I mean, I grew up playing the piano in church, but every now and again when I'm sitting here, I will go downstairs and get on the piano or just get on the organ. Nobody else is here. When I want to remember my grandmother or the community that I grew up in, I always like kind of play something I'm familiar with. And I think it helps. It really does give me a new sense of hope.
Playing is also, it is a form of prayer. It's a form of meditation.
It is. I didn't think about that. I think sometimes the reason why I'm sitting here and like sometimes I will go downstairs and play is because it's like I don't have words. Like that's not what I have right now. Not words. It's like a different language. Definitely a different expression.
Despite being raised in the church and never really having to wrestle with his faith, Rashad has always been challenged to make sense of Christianity in light of America's racial history of slavery, lynching, and oppression.
For Lent this year, I am teaching a class on the cross and the lynching tree. I was just rereading it today. It's been powerful, right? And also terrifying to even read through Cone's book and talking about like the language during the lynching era of the Ku Klux Klan wanting to redeem America or to take the country back. It sounds gravely too familiar to what we hear now. But I think a part of the work of my ministry is unearthing the truth. I went to Ferguson this summer to visit the site where Michael Brown was killed. And what was so moving to me was that there's a new patch of cement in the middle of the street where his body stayed on the ground so long that the blood baked into the cement and they could not wash it out. So they had to take that cement up, destroy it, and put a new patch there. But that's a deeper message there. It's the idea that if we could remove the blood, if we could move the stain, the memory, we could move on. And for me, we can't.
Rashad is currently working on his PhD in the philosophy of education at Columbia University, where he researches how historically Black colleges and universities, like churches, used ritual, narrative, sites, and memories to give birth to communities that allowed people to stand in the face of despair, to protect the souls of people from falling into nihilism. That protection of the soul is why Rashad says that cultivating joy is so important.
And for me, I don't think that African-American communities, especially African-American like religious communities, we don't focus on joy enough. In most Black communities, the only time the family comes together in any serious way is for a funeral. And I think that has something to do with the social climate, that everyone is pulled in so many directions, worried about keeping food on the table, housing and employment, that we often like turn down invitations to be with people. But then when someone dies, it's like, oh, the family comes back together, the church comes back together, the choir has a reunion. And I take that reading from even the Gospel of John, where there are two encounters where Jesus is seen with his mother. It's at a wedding, when he turned water into wine. And then the next time we see Mary with her son is at the foot of the cross. It's that sense that the empire will keep you so busy, so spent, that you don't take those moments of joy seriously. That's why I love Cone's The Cross and the Lynching Tree, because it's not just about the despair of the crucifixion. It's that even in the face of lynchings, Black folk, he says, would not allow their lives to be squeezed out by lynchings, that they always made sure that there are moments for joy. That's where blues comes from, that I might have hell all week, but it's Friday night when I get to that club, like it's going off. So if you didn't get your joy on Saturday, then you got it on Sunday. And if you were lucky enough, you did it both in the club and at church on Sunday. But that joy is so important. Black joy for me is what grounds the community together. Two, it also opens up the space for that creativity to imagine something new.
And are there ways that you then are actively, how are you cultivating that joy? What are the things you're doing within Abyssinian, within your community, to create that space?
So one of the things that we do here at Abyssinian, every summer, we begin the year off with this Black Joy block party. It's our homecoming Sunday in September. We block the street off. The kids are out. The DJ's outside. And you literally leave the sanctuary and come straight into a block party. And so that's one of our major moments of joy. But again, to be honest with you, I don't know if I'm that intentional about it anymore. It's something that it doesn't happen on its own. And if you're not intentional about it, it won't happen. I think that for ministers, for clergy, for churches, we have to do a better job at it. Because the demands on an everyday basis makes it so difficult to maintain that joy.
Well, and it sounded like it has a lot to do with ritual, that what you're learning or focusing on in school, that protection of the soul, the protection of the joy, is based in ritual and in narrative. And those are things that, I mean, they can happen accidentally, but ritual is very intentional.
Definitely.
Narrative as well.
Oftentimes when we talk about church and social justice, we invoke the language of a prophet, but the office of the priest is just as important, right? Because the prophet is one who's speaking truth, but the priest is the one who creates but also preserves the rituals of the community. And so I think that a part of the work of being a minister, also being an organizer, and even in movements, in every movement, there's a moment of joy, right? And that's what keeps it going, right? It's not just depressing. There are moments that break out, and that joy is what gives you the strength to resist day in and day out.
Well, on that, do you want to offer a final prayer or a final word of what you want to invoke, both for Abyssinian, your community, and for the larger movement?
Every day, it's my prayer that when I come to a place like Abyssinian, I'm always mindful of the people who came this way. Church was finished in 1923, and I think about the generations that walked in and out of these doors and what they endured the Saturday before they came to church, or the Friday. And this place gave them a sense of meaning. It gave them a sense of hope. It gave them a sense of love. And I think that their presence is with us all the time. But it's always my prayer that in the work that I do day in and day out, that I am pleasing God, but that I'm also making my grandparents proud. And that I am working hard to create a world that is more just, that's more loving, and that is more hopeful for the generations unborn that are yet to come. And that's what keeps me moving. That's what keeps me pushing.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey guys, before you go, if you like Everyday Changemakers and want more people to find it, it would be fantastic if you would rate and review the show in iTunes, even if that's not where you actually listen to it. If you have a moment right now, open the iPhone podcast app on your phone, click on your library, click on shows, then click Everyday Changemakers, and just scroll down to the bottom of the show page where you can give a rating with one tap and write a review. I really appreciate you making time to do it if you can. Thank you so much for your support. As a reminder, the Drop Your Nets guide is available for you at kamararose.com/resources. Everyday Changemakers is a production of yours truly in collaboration with markmedia.org.